So Gamdius' budget case, the Argus E1, seems like a pretty good value on paper, coming in with that sweet RGB and a power supply basement chucked in a mid-tower format, all for 50 Aussie dollars or around 30 to 40 US dollars. However, it also has some not so good features you might want to think about before picking this case up. First off is the front panel. It's completely sealed, which seems like it's beginning to become a bit of a trend for budget cases at this point. We'll be checking out how that affects thermals later in the video, and second is the acrylic side panel. Now, an acrylic side panel might not seem that bad at first, but it's after you've had it for a while that you'll be wishing it was glass, because acrylic is plastic, and plastic gets scratched when you try to clean it. And to add to that, it builds static when you clean it, so it attracts even more dust. With that acrylic rant over, let's get to know a bit about the outside of the case. Starting off with the front, it's completely plastic with a brushed finish that actually doesn't look too bad. At the top of the front panel, you'll find a button to control the various RGB modes, and small perforations at the top to help with airflow. And at the bottom, there's a gap that you can use to take off the front panel. Taking it off reveals the mount for three 120mm fans. At the top of the case, there's two USB 2.0 ports, one USB 3.0 port with a USB 2.0 pass-through in case if your motherboard doesn't support USB 3.0, headphone and mic jacks, and a power and reset button. There's also a magnetic dust filter up here that covers the mounts for two 120mm fans or one 140mm fan. And around back, there's a 120mm fan mount which is occupied by a pre-installed fan, and that uses a 3-pin motherboard connection. The case also sits on 4 rubber padded case feet to stop it sliding around, and at the bottom there's also a plastic mesh that kind of resembles a dust filter. So with the exterior out of the way, let's get inside the case. The acrylic side window is held on with 4 metal thumb screws. The only problem is with this mount that there's no standoffs holding the panel in place, so after you remove the thumb screws, it just falls off. But anyway, inside the case there's a decent amount of cable cutouts, with 1 up top for your CPU power cable and 2 on the motherboard tray. However, they get covered up with wider ATX or micro ATX boards, so you have to use the cutouts to the right of the motherboard tray with wider boards. Now, in theory, that makes cable management harder, but in practice it actually made it a little easier because there's more room behind that section of the motherboard tray. And there's also cutouts on the power supply basement for your front I/O cables. So you'll be fine cable management wise with any board. As for drive mounts, the case has some decent options. Behind the motherboard tray there's a mount for 2.5-inch drives like SSDs, and over to the right of the motherboard tray there's another 2.5-inch drive mount. You can also mount it with the cables going out through the top or the bottom, whichever orientation suits your needs. And down in the power supply basement there's 2 drive caddies which can be used for 2.5-inch or 3.5-inch drives. Unfortunately, the drive cage isn't actually removable, so you're stuck with a max length for your power supply of about 170 to 180mm, depending on if your power supply is modular. And as for GPU support, you'll be able to fit anything up to about 350mm long. However, if you want to stick a radiator or fans in the front, that comes down to about 310 to 330mm. And as for air cooler clearance, there's about 155mm of room here. Now for radiator support. In the front you can fit up to a 240mm rad, up top you can fit a 240 here as well, however you'll also need to take out the back fan to fit it up there. And at the back there's support for a 120mm radiator. And before I forget, the RGB implementation uses a 5V 3-pin RGB header if you want to control it with your motherboard, and it also uses a Molex connector to power it. So with pretty much everything out of the way, let's get into the thermals. You can go to the time on screen now if you want to skip to the conclusion. Basically, all of the CPU results were inconclusive, so we'll just move on to GPU results straight up. By maxing out the case with fans, so 3 in the front and 2 on the top, and 1 in the back, we saw a drop in temps of about 7 degrees, which means it is possible just to brute force airflow through this case with a bunch of extra fans. However, you can also just take a more modest approach by having 1 exhaust at the back and 2 exhausts on top, which reduces temps from stock by about 4 degrees. Something also to note is the restrictiveness of the front panel. By removing the front panel, the temps dropped by about 6 degrees, indicating that this front panel is quite possibly more restrictive than the Masterbox Lite 5's front panel, as that saw a drop of 5 degrees when taking off the front panel. However, those figures are within margin of error, so take that with a grain of salt. Now, comparing the case's CPU results with all of the other cases I've reviewed on the channel, the Argus E1 actually did surprisingly well, beating out every other case but the Gemini M, losing to it by about 1 degree, which is within margin of error, so it's safe to say that it has relatively the same CPU thermals as the Gemini M. As for GPU results, the Argus E1 did pretty well, coming in with GPU results second to only the Cooler Master Masterbox Lite 5. So in conclusion, the Argus E1 isn't actually that bad of a case. The cable management is okay if you route all of your cables through the indented section of the case. Airflow is decent when compared to other cases of its price, and if you can live with that acrylic side panel, it's definitely a good option. However, if you can spend the extra few dollars and can live without a power supply basement, I would highly recommend Deepcool's budget offerings, like the Shield series or even the Matrix 55, because of their better thermals and build quality. So that's it for this review. I have a Discord server which you should totally join if you want to get more involved with the channel. If there's anything I can improve on with these reviews, let me know in the comments below. If you found this video helpful, be sure to hit that like button, and if you want to see more tech related content from me, you might want to consider subscribing. Anyway, I'll see you in the next one.